All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're diving deep into a topic that I think, well, let's face it, we've all wrestled with at some point: procrastination.
Oh, it's a universal struggle for sure, isn't it? I mean,
Ah.
who hasn't stared down a deadline with a mix of dread and, well, a sudden urge to reorganize their sock drawer?
That's me. Guilty as charged. But what's fascinating is, it's not just about being lazy, right? There's this whole intricate psychology behind why we put things off, even when we know it's going to bite us later.
Absolutely. It's like there's this hidden puppet master in our brains pulling strings, making us sabotage our own best intentions.
Okay, that's a bit creepy, but also kind of makes sense. So for this deep dive, we're turning to psychologist Shu Ya's book and a super helpful YouTube review summarizing it to unpack this whole procrastination puzzle. And one of the first things that jumps out is this idea that, get this, nobody wants to procrastinate.
Right. It's not like we wake up thinking, today I'm going to avoid all my responsibilities and just wallow in stress.
Exactly. So if it's not intentional, then what's the deal?
Well, both the book and that YouTube video highlight these sneaky patterns, these traps that we fall into. They call them the 7 traps of procrastination.
Okay, lay it on me. What are these traps? I'm ready to face my procrastination demons.
Well, you've got your deep-seated motivations lurking in the shadows.
Ooh, sounds ominous.
Right. Then there's later thinking, that oh-so-tempting illusion that we'll have more time, energy, motivation tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow, the magical land of getting things done. What else?
Emotional pressure can weigh us down. Unclear goals can make us feel lost at sea. Resistance to action can keep us stuck in neutral.
Okay, I'm starting to see the pattern here. It's like a whole army of excuses ready to ambush our productivity.
That's a great way to put it. And then we've got inefficient patterns and even an energy crisis. It's like our brain is working overtime to come up with reasons not to work.
So it's not just about willpower then. There's something deeper, something more psychological going on.
Oh, absolutely. And Shia really digs into the why behind these traps. One of the most fundamental concepts is aversion, which, simply put, is our natural human instinct to avoid pain and seek pleasure. It's hardwired into us.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, who wants to do things that make them feel bad?
Right. But this becomes a problem when we start avoiding tasks that are important, even necessary, just because they feel unpleasant.
Like, say, writing a thesis. Remember Ma Kay from the book? That poor student struggling to finish his thesis, he was the king of avoidance tactics.
Oh, Ma Kay, yes. A classic case of aversion in action. Sleeping in, suddenly becoming obsessed with organizing his sock drawer, anything but facing that thesis.
It's like his brain was saying, nope, not dealing with that stress right now, time for a break. But the thing is, that break would stretch into hours, even days.
Exactly. And he'd even justify it, telling himself he deserved a break. Which brings up a fascinating point. Why do we feel so deserving even when we're facing crucial deadlines?
Is it guilt for procrastinating in the first place? Or maybe a way to feel in control when the task itself feels overwhelming?
You're hitting on some key psychological mechanisms there. It could be guilt, a need for control, even fear of failure masked as a need for rest. It's like our brains are trying to protect us from discomfort, even at the cost of our own goals.
I've totally been there. That 5-minute break that turns into an hour of mindless scrolling on my phone.
We've all been there. But luckily, Shu Ya offers us a tool to combat this aversion trap: temptation bundling.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. What is it?
Well, it's basically pairing something we dread with something we enjoy, making the dreaded task a little less, well, dreadful.
So, like, if I hate folding laundry, I could watch my favorite show while I do it. The show becomes the temptation that makes the chore more bearable.
Precisely. You're using the power of positive association to trick your brain into cooperating. But sometimes procrastination runs deeper than just avoiding unpleasant tasks. There's this concept of learned helplessness that can explain why some people just, well, give up before they even start.
This reminds me of those experiments, and I know they're ethically questionable now, where they'd shock dogs in cages. And even when the door was open, they wouldn't escape because they'd learned that their efforts were futile.
Right. Those experiments, while disturbing, do illustrate a powerful point. Repeated failures can lead to this sense of hopelessness, and Shu Ya highlights how this translates to human behavior. We might avoid tasks simply because we believe we'll inevitably fail, setting ourselves up for a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So it's like if you've bombed every presentation you've ever given, you might start believing that you're just inherently bad at public speaking, and avoid any situation that requires it.
Exactly. And this is where it's crucial to understand the impact of repeated failures. It's like our brain has this reward system, and repeated failures dim the lights, making us less motivated to even try.
That's a pretty bleak picture. So is there a way to rewire that thinking to turn the lights back on?
Thankfully, yes. Shuya suggests shifting our focus from innate ability, which can feed that sense of helplessness, to effort. Remember that line from Shawshank Redemption. Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies.
Ooh, chills. Love that movie. So it's about clinging to that hope and believing that effort can lead to improvement.
Exactly. It's about rewiring that negative self-talk and focusing on what we can control: our actions, our persistence, our commitment to growth. We might not be naturally gifted in every area, but we can always learn and improve with effort.
Okay, that's actually really empowering. But what about fear of failure? That feeling of, what if I'm not good enough, that keeps so many of us from taking risks?
Fear of failure, another big one. Shiya tells the story of Aylin, who was offered an incredible job at this prestigious company, but turned it down because she was terrified of not being good enough. A classic example of how fear can hold us back.
Yeah, I can totally relate to Alan. I remember when I was offered the chance to lead a project at work, and I almost said no because I was so scared of messing it up.
It's a common struggle, and it often comes from tying our self-worth to our achievements. So if we fail, we feel like we are a failure, like it reflects on us as a person.
So how do we break free from this fear trap? It can't be as simple as just telling ourselves to be brave, right?
Right, it's more nuanced than that. And this is where growth mindset comes in, a concept developed by Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck.
Oh yeah, I've heard of growth mindset. It's about believing that our abilities aren't fixed, but can be developed through effort and learning. So instead of seeing challenges as threats, we see them as opportunities to grow and improve.
Exactly. It's embracing the journey, even the messy parts, knowing that setbacks are just stepping stones, not roadblocks.
I love that. This is already making me rethink my own relationship with procrastination, and we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, just wait. We still have perfectionism, passive aggression, self-deception, and a whole bunch of other fascinating concepts to unpack.
Bring it on. I'm ready to delve even deeper into this procrastination labyrinth and uncover more strategies to finally conquer this beast.
All right, let's talk about a trap that I think a lot of high achievers especially might find themselves falling into: perfectionism. And it's not just, wanting to do well. It's this kind of crippling fear of not meeting these impossibly high standards.
Oh yeah, it's like aiming for a flawless masterpiece every single time, which, let's be honest, is just not realistic.
Exactly. And Shia's own experience, where she kept putting off taking on new clients even though she was qualified, really highlights this.
Oh, right. She felt like she needed more preparation, more knowledge, but really, it was that fear of not being the perfect therapist holding her back.
Exactly. And her story really shows how perfectionism isn't always about the external results. It's this internal struggle to live up to these often unattainable expectations we set for ourselves. And to really get this, it's helpful to understand the difference between adaptive and maladaptive perfectionism.
So adaptive perfectionism would be like, striving for excellence, but still being able to function, to get things done.
Right.
Whereas maladaptive perfectionism is when that pursuit of perfection becomes so, I don't know, intense that it prevents any action from being taken. It's like being stuck in this loop of it's not good enough yet forever.
Precisely. And as Shuya points out, this maladaptive perfectionism is a major fuel for procrastination. It's that voice in our heads whispering, wait for the perfect conditions, which, let's face it, rarely, if ever, actually exist.
Right. It's like that saying, perfect is the enemy of good. By waiting for everything to align perfectly, we end up achieving nothing. And then, ironically, we fall short of our own standards because we never even started.
Exactly. So to break free from this trap, there are a couple of key things to keep in mind. First, we need to acknowledge that imperfection is a natural part of any process. It's like embrace the journey, the learning, the improving, rather than fixating on this flawless end product.
That makes a lot of sense. It takes
Yeah.
the pressure off, right? You don't have to get everything perfect on the first try.
Right. Second, focus on taking action. Even if it's a small step, even if it's a messy first draft, just doing something can break that paralysis of perfectionism.
It's like giving ourselves permission to be works in progress rather than these polished final products.
Exactly. All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about a trap that can be, well, a little trickier to navigate passive aggression. It's where procrastination becomes almost like a weapon, often born out of these power imbalances or an inability to express negative emotions directly.
Oh, I know this one all too well. Su Yi's story from the book, where she used procrastination to kind of get back at her overbearing boss, really hit home for me.
Right. Sui felt powerless to challenge her boss directly, so she'd drag her feet on projects, create chaos as a way to express her anger. A classic example of passive aggression in action.
And it's not just limited to the workplace, right? It can pop up in any relationship where we feel resentful or unheard, but we don't have the, I don't know, the tools or the courage to communicate directly.
Absolutely. It's like, agreeing to plans you have zero interest in and then forgetting about them or canceling at the last minute with some vague excuse. You're saying no without actually saying it.
Oh, yeah, the classic "I'm so busy" routine.
Exactly. But while these little acts of rebellion might feel satisfying in the moment, they don't actually address the root of the problem.
So how do we move from passive-aggressive procrastination to healthier ways of dealing with those feelings?
Well, Shuya offers some great advice. First, become aware of those passive-aggressive behaviors. Once we recognize them, we can start to explore the anger that's fueling them.
So it's like, acknowledge that anger is a valid emotion and try to understand where it's coming from. Like, is it a sense of injustice? Feeling undervalued, maybe a pattern of being taken advantage of?
Exactly. And once we understand the root of that anger, we can start communicating our feelings constructively. This might mean setting boundaries, having a direct conversation with the person involved, or seeking support from a therapist or a trusted friend. It's about moving from passive resistance to active problem solving.
Love that. From resistance to resolution. Okay, let's tackle another sneaky trap. Self-deception. It's like tricking ourselves into believing that if we just ignore a problem long enough, it'll magically disappear.
The story Shuya shares about the mom delaying her child's dental care, hoping the cavities would just resolve themselves, is a perfect example of this.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's a common form of self-deception, downplaying the severity of an issue to avoid that discomfort or fear. Like, you need to have a difficult conversation with someone, but you keep putting it off, telling yourself it's not that big a deal, or I'll find the right time, when deep down, delaying it just makes things worse.
It's a dangerous game to play. Ignoring small problems rarely makes them go away. They often just fester and grow, turning into much bigger headaches down the line. Remember the butterfly effect, even seemingly insignificant actions can have ripple effects.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought. It really highlights how procrastination can turn minor inconveniences into major crises. So how do we break free from this self-deception? Is it about confronting our fears head-on, even when it feels scary?
It's about recognizing those patterns of self-deception and consciously choosing to act, even when it's hard. Sometimes the most difficult step is simply admitting the problem exists. But once we do that, we can start taking small steps towards addressing it, rather than letting fear dictate our actions.
Speaking of actions that are hard to take, let's discuss a trap that's kind of related to self-deception, escaping responsibility. It's about avoiding decisions to try and, sidestep potential negative outcomes. Like we're trying to outrun the consequences of our choices.
Right, and this reminds me of Yoon Yoon, the young woman who was struggling to decide between taking a new job offer and staying at her current company.
Oh, Yun, yes.
Yeah.
She was so terrified of making the wrong choice that she just kept delaying the decision, driving her friends crazy, asking for advice, and then second-guessing herself constantly.
A classic case of analysis paralysis, stuck in that loop of what-ifs.
And for her, it wasn't about being lazy or indecisive. It was about that deep-seated fear. Fear of making the wrong call, disappointing others, and facing the unknown.
Exactly. But just like we've seen with these other traps, running away rarely solves the problem. It often just makes it worse.
So what's the antidote to this decision-making paralysis? How do we break free from that fear and start making choices with more confidence?
Well, Shuya, drawing on the work of Joseph Ferrari, offers some really practical strategies. One is to limit your choices. Too many options can be overwhelming, so narrowing things down can make the decision-making process much less daunting.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It's like going to a restaurant with a 10-page menu. You're practically paralyzed by choice. But if you can narrow it down to 2 or 3 dishes, suddenly the decision is much easier. So what other strategies can we use?
Another helpful technique is to weigh the pros and cons of each option. This lets you look at the situation more objectively, rather than getting swept up in your emotions, which, can be clouded by fear.
So it's about taking a step back, analyzing things logically, and making a more informed decision. Less emotional roller coaster, more strategic planning.
Exactly. It's also important to gather information, but don't get stuck overthinking it. Research is great, but there comes a point where too much information can actually lead to analysis paralysis. Setting a time limit for research and decision-making can be a game changer.
Oh, this one speaks to my soul. I can get lost in the research rabbit hole for hours, reading articles, reviews, even when I already have enough information to make a decision.
We've all been there, and once you've made a decision, commit to it. Don't second-guess yourself or dwell on those what-ifs. Just move forward.
This is where self-compassion comes in, right? It's okay to feel a little doubt or uncertainty, but we don't have to let those feelings paralyze us. We can trust ourselves, trust the process we went through to reach that decision.
Absolutely. And finally, Shuya suggests journaling as a way to process that decision-making journey. Writing down your thoughts and feelings can help you identify and address any roadblocks or limiting beliefs that might be contributing to that procrastination.
Journaling is like having that honest conversation with yourself, right? Getting all those thoughts and emotions out in a safe space. It can be so clarifying.
It really can. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground with decision-making, but we're not done yet. We still have present bias and later thinking to explore 2 more pieces of the procrastination puzzle.
All right, let's do it. I'm ready to dive into those temporal traps and see how our relationship with time can really mess with our ability to, well, actually get things done. All right, let's talk about present bias. I think we're all guilty of this one to some degree. It's that age-old battle between instant gratification and, those ambitious long-term goals we set for ourselves.
Yeah, present bias is that sneaky tendency to prioritize those immediate rewards, even if they lead to, well, not so great outcomes down the road.
Like choosing a double fudge sundae over a salad, even though you know it's not going to help you fit into those skinny jeans.
Exactly. It's like our brains are wired to hit that instant play button on gratification.
Shuya uses that study about movie choices, remember? People were more likely to pick mindless entertainment over, like, thought-provoking films if they could watch right away. It's like our brains are hardwired for instant gratification.
Totally. Our brains evolved to prioritize those immediate needs, for survival. But in today's world where temptation is everywhere, this wiring can really lead us down the procrastination rabbit hole.
We put off those important tasks, even though we know they'll benefit us in the long run, because that quick dopamine hit from scrolling social media or playing a video game is just too tempting.
It's like knowing you should be prepping for that big presentation, but that Netflix binge is calling your name, and then suddenly it's midnight and you're scrambling to finish, drowning in stress.
Oh, tell me about it. I've been there so many times. So how do we break free from this present bias? Is it even possible?
Absolutely. There are definitely ways to outsmart this tendency. One approach is to proactively remove those temptations. Like if social media is your weakness, put your phone in another room or use an app to block those websites while you're working.
So it's like creating a new distraction zone, right?
Yeah.
A fortress of focus where those tempting apps and websites can't penetrate.
Exactly. Out of sight, out of mind. Another strategy is to find healthier ways to satisfy that need for instant gratification. Instead of, completely depriving yourself of pleasure, which can backfire, find small, manageable ways to reward yourself for making progress on your goals.
So instead of eating the whole bag of chips, maybe just have a handful and then reward yourself with the walk in nature or listening to your favorite music. It's about finding that balance.
Absolutely. It's about making choices that align with your long-term vision while still acknowledging those immediate needs. And here's a fun one. Shuya suggests abstracting or uglifying temptations to make them less appealing. Like if you're trying to resist that sugary treat, visualize the negative consequences, like a sugar crash or feeling sluggish later.
It's like giving those temptations a makeover, but instead of enhancing their appeal, you're showing their, less glamorous side.
Exactly. It's a way to engage your rational mind to override those impulsive urges.
All right, let's wrap things up with the final trap. Later thinking, that deceptive belief that we'll have more time, more energy, more motivation tomorrow.
Later thinking is like the ultimate procrastination enabler. It's that seductive lie we tell ourselves that the future will magically be different from the present. It's all those classic lines like, I'll start exercising next week, or I'll get to that project tomorrow. But tomorrow never seems to arrive, or if it does, it comes with its own set of demands and distractions. It's like this illusion we create to kind of soothe our present discomfort. But what's really interesting is how later thinking is tied to our perception of time. Shuya talks about the difference between objective time, which is, measured by clocks and calendars, and subjective time, which is our internal experience of time.
So objective time is that constant tick-tock of the clock, those 24 hours in a day that march on regardless of our wishes. But subjective time is how we actually perceive and experience those 24 hours.
Exactly. And this disconnect between objective and subjective time can really feed our procrastination. We overestimate how much time we'll have in the future and underestimate how long things will actually take.
Which leads to that I'll do it later mentality, which usually just results in, well, last-minute panic and stress.
Exactly. So to combat this later thinking trap, it's crucial to challenge that assumption that we'll magically have more time, energy, or motivation in the future. The reality is we only have now.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. It's like we've peeled back the layers of procrastination, exposed its inner workings, and armed ourselves with all these strategies to finally defeat it.
I hope so. Remember, procrastination isn't about laziness or weakness. It's often a symptom of these deeper psychological mechanisms at play.
And by understanding those mechanisms, aversion, learned helplessness, fear of failure, perfectionism, all those traps we talked about, we can start to make more conscious choices and break free from that procrastination cycle.
So here's a final thought. Ask yourself, what's one small step you can take today to chip away at a task you've been avoiding? Even the tiniest action can create momentum and set you on the path toward achieving your goals.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of procrastination. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and practical tools to help you conquer this universal challenge and live a more fulfilling and productive life.